I'm in Dominica, for example, and I am a citrus grower, or I'm a banana grower, the indigenous bank may well have more understanding and empathy towards my circumstances, because those banks come out of the society and in some respects are shaped by the commonalities that have shaped those societies. And so that gentleman in his perhaps weathered hat and water boots might not find comfort, Mr. Speaker. It's like we're back in kindergarten with this fella. Mr. Speaker, it's so distressing. But let me continue, Mr. Speaker. As we try to bring reasonable debate to important matters, that gentleman, perhaps in that weathered hat and his water boots, going, Mr. Speaker, into the marbled halls of one of the Main Street banks, might not be as welcome as if he were to go into his indigenous bank. Indeed, he may well own 10 or 15 shares in that indigenous bank. So I don't want us to forget that and the contribution that those indigenous banks have made, are making, and hopefully, after the passage of this legislation, will continue to make in terms of the development of the region. There is room for them. And I don't want it to be said of this Parliament that we lock them out. There is room for them. And so, Mr. Speaker, that aspect of the legislation for me, as I said, ought to excite some attention. Mr. Speaker, I did say I would not be long, but I wanted to speak to one other small matter. That has to do, Mr. Speaker, with depositors. You see, I believe that for far too long, the banking sector has been preoccupied. Rights of directors, rights of shareholders, rights of employees, and everybody, Mr. Speaker, is jockeying. But the most critical people in the banking sector have to be the depositors. Yes. This morning I was very pleased to hear the news from our Honorable Prime Minister that Bank of Commerce, 30 years, people have waited. It took Unity to bring some relief. I'm very happy that we have announced it, and it is here.
We did that. We did that.
You all did that, but Mr. Speaker, sometimes. But you want to finish the song? On a point of order. I was just trying to do some clarification as to something that the Honourable Member from number 9 had said earlier. And the information has gotten back to me, and I will further verify when I'm able to leave the chambers, that the draft for this banking bill might have been signed off around the 24th of February 2015. That is the first time we would have had a full draft in order to have consultation. And so I will verify, member for number 9, but that means, it means then, Mr.
Prime Minister himself was at that meeting.
We discussed it.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, so therefore it means that if the member is indeed honourable, he probably needs to retract what he was saying in terms of saying that it was there from November 2013. That is misleading the public. We're not here to do that. I'm very serious about it, honourable member. In February of this year, the bill in its form was either signed off or presented to the government. It means then that Labour administration
did not have an opportunity to use that for consultation. Right? We just want to be clear on that. Secondly, on another point of order, the first time the honorable member for number 9 is probably hearing about the issue of the Bank of Commerce is this morning. Which means, therefore, they had absolutely nothing, and I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, absolutely nothing to do with the process with respect to the Bank of Commerce. It just so happened, Mr. Speaker, that they are now in government when the process is complete, and so they want to take the glory. But they must also be able to take right, anything that is this government. So I just wanted to make those things clear.
Order ought to be specific, stick to what the point you're trying to make, and move on.
So, Speaker, am I going to get back my 20 minutes? The honourable member for
Proceed,
number
honourable member.
Thank
Take
you.
the point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Speaker, you know, sometimes when you're little children, they say you throw a sprat to catch a whale. All day today, they're running from the banking bill. Running from it, criticizing it. Oh, no. That is not us. It wasn't there when I was there. I wasn't sitting in the Monetary Council when I was... But they want now. You see, I just throw out the thing about the Bank of Commerce. You know. It was deliberate. Because see how quick they jump up to take credit for that? No. You must understand that as a government, you sat in government for 20 years. For 20 years you sat. And you can't pick and choose what you take credit for. All of it. Listen. Take Bank of Commerce and take the banking bill and take everything. Because the reality is that the bill was drafted, came out of you. So I'm
Proceed, man. Don't let Junior man upset you so.
upset. I'm waiting for you to finish the song. I'm waiting for Mr. Speaker, I have been waiting all day for the honourable member from number 3 to finish the song. Come here with an incomplete song.
I wait one frame.
You wait one frame?
I wait one frame.
Incomplete song with a discordant chorus to his colleagues.
Let the member know once I finish, I always win.
Yeah, boy, you're winning opposition. Yes. We're just commenting that he has won in opposition. So that is a good thing. Mr. Speaker, I was seeking to make the point that there is a role, as I've said, for the indigenous banks. And I believe that we ought, Mr. Speaker, to not minimize or seek through our debate, our discussion, and indeed through the effects of this legislation to throw them out, because they have performed and continue to perform the interests of the stakeholders who are the people. But the point before I was interrupted was really the question of the depositors. And we have heard about the Bank of Commerce just this morning, the announcement being made this morning by the Prime Minister, that those people who have suffered for 3 decades will now get some relief. That Social Security, it was everybody's money, will now get some relief. I'm so happy to hear about the little philatelic bureau in Nevis, will get some relief. 30, of course, the building was burned down where they were housed. We don't know who burned it down, but it was burned down. So, 3 decades. 3 decades. Mr. Speaker, people have waited. What this announcement, and it comes, you know, whatever else you say about the Honorable Prime Minister, his timing is impeccable. Impeccable. He times things in an impeccable. I've always said that of him. Honorable member from number 7, timing is impeccable. Yeah. Yes. You know? Of course. Good thing. You know, sometimes, Mr. Speaker, when you're on a vessel and it's sinking, It's good to jump off, you know. Jump off and swim ashore. Come to safe land. And you see where he is today now? Prime Minister. Announcing to the Federation that relief has finally come for the people of the depositors, that is, of the Bank of Commerce. And so, Mr. Speaker, it brings me to the last point I wish to make, and that is the depositors. The depositors, Mr. Speaker, have to be the most relevant people of any bank and in any banking sector. The depositors. It's important. And so we as policymakers must do all that we can to ensure that we create the necessary framework where depositors are protected and depositors and those using the banks have confidence in the banking sector.
Yes.
Any student of banking will say that at any given time, no matter how big the bank, it could be Citibank, Barclays Bank, or who, if all the depositors went the same day for their money, they couldn't get it. Because banks are in the business of collecting from Tom and lending to Harry. And therefore, confidence is important. And the protection of depositors is important. Because when we have a Stanford Bank or we have a Bank of Commerce, it sends, I think the word I heard used this morning is contagion.
Yes.
It sends a particular message out there. And we don't want, Mr. Speaker, for our people to revert to putting money under their bed or in their mattress. We want people to be using the banks and use them with a level of confidence. And I believe that this legislation, the bill is designed to instill greater confidence in the ultimate stakeholders who are the people of this currency union, the depositors, and those who use the banking sector. Mr. Speaker, you would realize that I have not gone into the sections, because I said I felt that others have done so, and there's little to be gained from repetition. I wanted to use my brief time here to simply deal with some highlights and to address, Mr. Speaker, what I consider to be the salient aspects of the bill from a policy perspective, so that members of the public, those who are here in the gallery, those who are listening via the various media houses, that they can have a clear sense of what we are seeking to do. And that despite the shouts that you've heard, the reality is that the legislation does not profess to be perfect. No piece of legislation is. The legislation may well, in the fullness of time as we see it operate, lend itself to amendments throughout the ECCU. But we cannot say with any degree of conviction that the legislation is not necessary, because the central bank has said it to us, the good friend at the Monetary Union has agreed, and we feel that it is timely that we get, Mr. Speaker, the type of framework which will strengthen the hand of that institution in which we have vested the necessary power to supervise and regulate this critical industry. So, Speaker, we raised the point in different forums as part of the consultative process since this bill first came. And we raised the point that, you know, we were ceding authority, great weighty authority, to the central bank. And the example was shared with us, and I hope I'm at liberty to share it with the House and the nation, that there is some comfort in the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we have a combination, if you will, or a shared responsibility. Let me use that language. And they use the example of one member country of the ECCU, whom the IMF had been urging to devalue currency. But because such a decision would require unanimity amongst the ECCU members, it could not be done. When, to the contrary, those institutions have demanded of other countries that they devalue, they did not have the luxury, if you will, of that shared responsibility. And so, in a way, notwithstanding that we are ceding responsibility and ceding authority, we are, if you will, replacing it with a collective responsibility for the entire Eastern Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, and the 600,000 or so people that inhabit this beautiful space that we call home. And so, Mr. Speaker, I think the bill, despite the criticisms, is timely. I think it is necessary, and I would wish it safe passage through this Honourable House in its current form. And to say, being omnibus legislation designed to regulate the entire region, that we would expect that it would be passed in the same form in the other members of the ECCU. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your time. My colleagues on the other side who interrupted sometimes, but trying their best as well, so I appreciate that. And I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to come here and speak substantively on a major piece of legislation from these beautiful government benches. Very happy for that. Mr. Speaker, if I can...
About time.
Well,
Come here, go work out.
Mr. Speaker, if I can leave with a word of advice to my learned friends, my colleagues on the other side, that having been where they now are, having sat there for some time, I would say to them that they ought to pace themselves, because if you get too antsy too early, you could run out of breath. So let them pace themselves, because they'll be there for a very long time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.